So my name is Jimmy Kriigel. I work for Georgia Institute of Technology, and I work in the Office of International Education. And I want to talk about kind of how I survived shared hosting. So my site, Office of International Education, we go by OIE. We handle all the international students and scholars that come in. It's about 6,000 students and scholars that come over to Tech each year. We also have a study abroad, so everyone leaving the country to go on their programs. We also have a global internship group. And then we also have this international plan degree designation. And so what that is, they have to study abroad a couple times or do a global internship and do a couple language courses. So I have all this on one site, and it has over like 200 web form quizzes, contests, all sorts of resources, and I'm on shared hosting. So here's the hosting options we have at Georgia Tech. All department websites are on shared hosting. So what that means is, you know, they're originally, I believe they were set up for student servers so they could have student websites, and then they sort of consolidated when more departments wanted to build websites. And they're all kind of limited to this 128 megs of memory per site. So, you know, like I said, historically it's for different departments and research sites. So as the Drupal usage grew on campus, our servers did not. So you can see, like, my site is that cat trying to fit in that box, which is web hosting. I found this good comment that talks about, it's 8 years old too, which I thought was even better. It's like, the Drupal community recommends a VPS with a minimum of 256 of memory for a serious site. So we're not quite there. So the site was failing. We constantly would get kind of white screens of death anytime we'd run cron or clear the cache. Because the site was so big, kind of managing the content was just inefficient. Users were constantly generating new content, filling out stuff, and then if one of my content creators or content authors would delete something or remove something by accident, to restore that was just a nightmare. I'd basically have to download the whole site, put it in a dev environment, find that node, restore it, copy that content, create a new node, put it in there. It just was just crazy. And so I have about 10 content creators and then 1,500 to 5,000 students just doing all sorts of forms and everything else. So as you can see, that's the cat is my site, and there's clearing cache, and it would just fall apart. So here's what the white screen of death looks like if you haven't seen one in a while. So what we had to do is we had to like test everything. And by we, I mean kind of me, because I'm the only person from my department. So what I ended up doing was I downloaded lots of copies of the site and set up VMs, and I just started testing everything. Like everything was on the table. So the first thing that's easy is disable modules you're not using. Okay, that's easy. But then you got to start going a little bit deeper and removing modules that you don't need or you can find a workaround. For example, like we have one for quizzes and we also have one for true and false. And so we're like, okay, what's a creative way we can do this? We can have a multiple choice question as a true and false, and then we can turn off the true and false module. So that's like another way. I mean, we're saving like 1% here, but all of those like start adding up. And you know, no diss to the people who make the true or false module, but I'm like, we're thinking creatively and how to work under this huge constraint. Then you have other stuff that's just sort of, you know, easy, and a lot of this was more talking to my content creators about like images. Like they don't need to upload a 9 meg image for a small box like this. So you talk to them about resizing and just basically optimizing any way you're pulling from like external CSS or JavaScript. You know, you can start loading some of the stuff into the theme rather than per page, and that way you're not loading it over and over again. And some tools that we use to help this is like, one of my biggest ones is just the Chrome inspect tool, and you can sort of see what stuff's loading, different little timelines, but that's more for client side. The other one is, there's a really good talk in here too, and I have a link to it, this XHProf. It was developed by Facebook, and so what they do is benchmark and tracing on the server side. So you can watch as the PHP gets rendered, and it shows the different modules, and you kind of can dig through, you click on each one, and it goes and shows you how much memory each module is using. So what I found out was the quiz module would try to load on every page. I mean, it wasn't like loading everything, but it would show up on every page, even if you're not on a quiz node. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. There's some space we can save like 20 megs of memory. And then the biggest thing was just kind of caching every page that could be cached, and I would set the cache to like high. So like, all right, we're just a week, you know, like if this page is not going to change anytime, let's just set the cache as high as it could. So that way when cron does run like every night or so, it wouldn't just cripple the site. But, you know, this whole thing is, you know, we just couldn't keep up with all these issues. You know, it's just like this cat. It's like we're just playing like Jenga all the time. But I probably should have reversed that gift and put it back on there so like we're fixing it. So one of the big first improvements we did was we split the site into two. So I called it OAE2, and we just moved all user-generated content to this site. We also made it more secure. We put it on a different Plus server. So now it lives on its own. It has its own memory usage. And then we had our main site now, and that would just be used for static content. So no users. We would also not have anyone log into that site except for our content authors, because we'd also would have 5,000 or 6,000 students through the course of 4 or 5 years just log in. And that doesn't really seem like that. This is one database entry, but over time, it's just everything just keeps growing. Like we were up to, I think, over 5,000 nodes on our site just from having all these user-generated content and just a different amount of stuff on there. So there we go, splitting. Now we have 2 cats. There's actually a 3rd cat in that box, but we're not going to talk about that. So there would be some piece of like that actually fixed a lot of my issues until I ran into another problem. And this is the web application firewall. So the web application firewall is this error that users would get, and it would be any user. It'd be anonymous users. It'd be like, international students would fill this out for their housing requests. So they haven't actually been accepted to tech. They don't have a login or anything, but they would try to fill out this stuff to start getting some of their paperwork through. And they would just get hit with it. And so since our international students are all over the world, we get them from almost all the countries, somewhere in China, the application firewall would be like, oh no, this is someone trying to do some sort of attack. And it's like, just cut them off and block it. And it was so interesting because it was anywhere there was an unsecured text field or text area. So any box where they're like trying to write an essay, it would just like immediately shut down and they couldn't fill it out. Or worse, they would fill it out, press submit, and then you would get this screen. It would just flash and all their work is done. So it was just crazy that you would just get this all the time. But then sometimes it'd be fine. Like sometimes I could, from home, I could edit it and it'd be fine. It would slip through. So it really took a lot of like trial and error to figure it out. So I would go back and forth with our shared hosting OIT team to try to figure this out. And basically what it did was it was just the traffic was it couldn't tell legitimate from illegitimate, and mainly because we'd have all these people all over the world always going and accessing our site. Which normally for, again, how the web hosting was set up, it's more for, different little small research, stuff like that, a lot more internal or people in the US looking at stuff. So after investigating it, I finally got a promising lead, which was use HTTPS. So use SSL, and that would secure my site and allow all the users to send their content through without it being blocked by the web application firewall. So this is my next goal I tried to go on. It's like, okay, let's turn on SSL. How do we do this? So we turned on HTTPS. So step 1, you have to get an SSL cert. There's a couple on here that I listed, but there's also a lot more, and it all depends on how much money you want to spend and how much time you want to spend, and also what your shared hosting provider is. So you just find a vendor, you buy or generate what you buy and generate your certificate, and then you install it. So the Let's Encrypt project is pretty great because it's free. The only downside of that is you have to renew it like every 8 months to just verify, because they're giving out these free SSL certs. You have to go and check in as much because there's more, since you're giving something away for free, there's more room for it to be abused. So they want you to check in, and I think you have to like verify your identity with them. So once you get that, and a lot of times your shared hosting provider will help you install it, or you'll have it on your sort of Plesk or web interface, a place for you to install your certificate. The second one is to configure your environment. So you add this line to your Htaccess. It's 3 lines on here. What I do for mine, and the way my SSL certificate works, is we have its subdomain.gatech or gatech.edu. So we only have one sort of subdomain that we're allowed. So we don't get allowed www because that goes into another. That's a subdomain on a subdomain. And so a lot of these certs are just, you have to type in your whatever you want your URL to be exactly. So either www or not, but that needs to be your static site from then on. That's where it needs to live. So I figured it's 2016 or 2015 when I did this. We don't need www anymore. And plus that's just weird to keep saying that on the phone or anywhere else. So I just didn't put that in there. So I use this rule. In my slide notes, I do have it for the Htaccess code for how to do it on different, with www and a couple other different redirects if this doesn't work for you on your shared hosting. The second thing you have to do is update settings.php. So there's a line item called base URL, equals, and then you just fill this in. I think it's commented out by default, and I don't remember when they added it. I think it was around Drupal 7.4, and I don't know where it is on Drupal 8. I believe it's still in there. Make sense? Pretty good? Cool. All right, so step 3. Now you have SSL turned on, because we turned it on the last step. You need to go update any mixed content you'll have. So the biggest offenders are like JavaScript if you're loading some libraries, or any external images, and sometimes CSS. So there's two kind of problematic areas. There's this relative path, which you can kind of see where it starts off at cat pictures. So by default, that's saying use whatever I browse to. So if I browse to, just if the server was set up as just HTTP and not HTTPS, then it's going to load that content that way. We kind of fixed that with setting up the base URL for Drupal, but if you're doing something non-standard, I would say, then you might have to go and actually write an absolute path to use HTTPS. The other one is, and you can see it kind of highlighted in this orange-yellow, is this like if you're loading like any content that's just HTTP, and you can just go through and correct that. You might have some problems if you're trying to use some widgets on some sites. Like one I had was we used like a slide rocket, was sort of like a slides embed one, and we had to actually go digging through there or test the site to get the code that was normally over HTTP, change it to HTTPS, make sure that certificate was valid so you could load that content in. Otherwise, if you try to do this, most of the time your browsers will just render like a white box where that content would be. And so you might not catch that right away because your browser is saying, I'm not going to load any insecure, or you'll have a little box on the top that says like load unsafe scripts. So that can be problematic depending on what content you're loading. Or you might need to say, well, maybe it's time we get off of Slide Rocket or whatever one you're using, or find a different way to do that. Okay, so here we are. So SSL saves the day for that. We don't get any more of the application firewall messages. Users can now submit content from around the world, so all of our forms are now working. It's great. We don't have to worry about man-in-the-middle attacks because they know they're submitting their content through the certificate, and they know they're sending it over SSL. We also worked with our legal department and the cybersecurity to get sort of these e-signature approved forms where normally students would have to turn in like 10 to 20 pages of just like handwritten signed copies. We were able to, now we can show that our site is secure, and we have a couple other provisions that they can now submit it through there, so they don't have to print something out, fill it out, sign it, and then turn it into us. And so now we don't have to worry about some paper. The other thing is too, is like my content editors, they travel a lot for different programs around the world. Now they can log in and edit stuff if they need to. And the same thing for users sending in data. You get the trust and verification. Google rankings will put your site higher if you have SSL turned on. I don't know what the weight is on there, but I know they were starting to implement that and make it a little bit heavier. And then there's this new protocol, HTTP/2, which will let your site, once you have it installed with Apache, it will increase your site performance and use lower bandwidth. Okay, so here we go. It's scaredy cat. But SSL is way too slow. Well, it is, but not really noticeable. So here's two bandwidth tests I did on my site. One with SSL on and one with it off. And you can see that it does increase. It's about 130 milliseconds for the page load. And you'll have a new box on this graph that says for the SSL to connect, where you don't. So this is huge. I mean, yes, it's a speed decrease, but compared to about 5 or 6 years ago, it would be just massive. I don't know if you guys remember, like on Amazon, they would have all their regular content, and you go to the checkout, and you just sit there and wait for pages to load until you could put your credit card in so you felt safe, because it would have the huge lock icon and stuff like that. So if you just sort of have that for your whole site now, it's not really going to be a noticeable thing for users. And that peace of mind that I get from it, and hopefully my users get from it, is worth a little bit of a delay. Okay, but what about SSL certificates? They're expensive and hard to install. Well, not really. Like the Let's Encrypt project has free, like I was talking about earlier. GoDaddy has them, which I know no one really likes them for their web hosting, but they do have cheap SSL certs. DigiCert, I've used them before, and they all range from like $10 to $50. I know GoDaddy always has coupons that you can use. And then if you're on shared hosting, most of them will install it for you for free, or there's a place for you to do it. And then a lot of times these vendors have real easy step-by-step. So you choose what kind of environment you're trying to install it in, and they're like, click here, and then log into your panel and install it like that. I've done it for some other sites, and it's been really easy. but only the login page needs to be secure. Well, not anymore, and it's not enough. You know, it's just like, you know, you're locking your door, but then you have all your windows and everything else open. Or you can see in this little picture, like the cat, look at that. See, he's going through nodes that are not secure to just unlock this cage and get out. So there was a secure page module. I used it in D6. It was terrible. It was so hard to configure. Just to have some content secure, I would not recommend it. It's broken and not maintained in D7, and Drupal 8 won't support it. So it's just easier to just skip that whole thing, do those 2 lines of the Htaccess and the settings.php. But what if I saw a scary SSL warning message once? Well, so that's only happens if you're browsing with an expired cert, a self-signed cert, or a site that doesn't have a cert. So it's not really that scary. If you just do it right, or you talk to your provider to help if you fix it, or if you get something like that. Okay, so now we're moving on to the next part. So it's meet your new friend, the CDN. So what is a CDN? So it's a content delivery network. Basically, you take all of the heavy stuff on your site and you move it off. And you put it onto these small nodes that are scattered throughout the world, so all of your customers can get those data, get your website from those smaller nodes that are closer to them, rather than coming all the way to Atlanta, Georgia. So like in this picture, look, the raccoon is moving your content for you really fast. Okay, so why do I use it? Well, number one, it reduces server load. I probably should move that higher up because of all the problems I've had with shared hosting. It's faster, you get higher availability because it will cache your site, so it can show the cache version of your site to an extent in case your site's having problems or is loading slow. You get lower latency because now you're sending your users to the closest node rather than sending them all the way to Atlanta, Georgia. And then also, it improves your Google score, which is kind of what we all care about, right? We want our sites to show up first on all the Google search results. So picking the right CDN, there's just a ton of them. So kind of what I was looking for was cost. Because we're a university, we still have limited money to spend on different little projects. Latency, so the more locations they have, the faster your content's going to be, because they might only have one in Asia, but you really need one in China, you need one in Southeast Asia, you need one in Australia. So that, depending on what your target audience is and what you're doing, you might choose one provider over another. Some of the features, this is all kind of standardized now that they have SSL. Sometimes they'll charge you more to have a certificate in there. And then also ease of use. Like how easy is it? Does it work with Drupal without me doing all this extra work? So I kind of came up with Key CDN. They had a real easy Drupal ready guide with step-by-step and screenshot instructions of how to do it. Their cost is really cheap. Sometimes with the cost, it can charge you where you're sending your data to. So it's one price to send it to Europe, it's another price to send it to Africa, it's another price to send it to Australia, and then you have to do calculations by looking at your logs to see, okay, I use this much bandwidth, and then it just sort of gets out of hand. So you think you have one estimate, you're like, okay, cool, like, yeah, $50 a year, that sounds pretty good, but then it might actually be more depending on where your target audience is in accessing your site. So for them, it's pretty simple. It's like a fixed price. You buy a little block, and as you burn through that block, they'll tell you to re-up and you buy another block. And like the block's whatever like $50 is, so like a terabyte, a little bit over a terabyte. And also some of these other providers, like the Max CDN, they have like a minimum you have to buy in. So you might have to buy in like $500. And that's a pretty big block. So if you're, you know, like a medium site, that could take a long time for you to burn through all that content, I mean, all that bandwidth to do. And then sometimes they also have ones where different little hidden fees. So I just like them. They were Drupal friendly, and they were pretty cost effective. Okay, so there's actually two types of CDNs. One is this manual upload, where you upload your content to the CDN yourself. So that works really well if you're doing stuff like live streaming video, or if you're hosting, say, like Linux ISOs or something big files. You just want to push that onto the CDN so they can still go to your site, but when they click the download button or they click on, you know, let's watch this video, it's actually getting served from their local CDN node. The kind of pros and cons of it, it only serves the files you upload. So if you don't put your whole website on the CDN, then you're not going to get that. But that's also a pro and a con. So, you know, whatever you put on there will be served, but whatever you don't won't be. So the other side of that is this pull. where you use like the module, the Drupal CDN module, and it will crawl your website, take your content that you want, copy it over to the CDN, makes a cached version of it, and it will serve it to your users based on where they're from. So, if they come to the site, say in Australia, it'll hit the Australian node first and load like all the fonts and images and any CSS, and then whatever's left, it will come from Atlanta. Okay, so the Drupal CDN module, it's great. It's probably one of the better modules out there. What it does is it'll automatically change the URLs to point to the CDN. So what that does is if you upload a picture, that picture will get the new URL attached to it. So if it's cdn.whatever.com, then it'll point that to there. So you don't have to go through and change all your content. It's great about that. It supports both those modules, both the push and the pull. Really easy to configure. You can blacklist file types. So what we have on our site is we have a lot of partner agreements, and while they are, sort of public information, we try to limit it more towards, we don't want that just to show up in Google search results, all these different ones. So we sort of like blacklisted some like PDFs and some other stuff. And you can actually do file types you don't want to show, or you can do different paths. So if you have a certain path, you're like, okay, /private, for example, you can just have it not pull any stuff from there. There's also a great stats page, supports SSL, which is great. And the biggest thing is it has a testing mode, which I don't ever see in modules. So the testing mode is amazing because you can turn on this testing mode and it's only for you or people with that permission level can see, and you can see your whole site running through the CDN and see what's breaking or what's not working without interrupting your normal user. So normally if I was going to deploy this, I'd just wake up at like 3 a.m. and try to set this all up when I'm half asleep. But instead, I can do it during normal business hours because there's a testing mode, so I can see what's working and what's not. The only minor issue I've found is this far future expiration, which is the CDNs, a lot of CDNs have this way where they won't expire cache that hasn't been updated, so they'll just hold on to it forever. So if you just have like your main logo, they'll hold on to it for a long time. However, it doesn't work if you use the IMCE module, which is like an image module. So a lot of our content editors use this, I think it's a CTools extension for inserting different pictures, and it will just break with that. So you can just turn that checkbox off. If you can not use the IMCE module, then that's great because then this is less times that your CDN has to crawl your site to update content, which means it's less bandwidth you're using for that, which means you're saving money. Okay, so here are some tests we did. Again, I used the pingdom.com, their tools, and I tried to find the server the farthest away, which was Australia, which I think at the time I did this test, they didn't actually have a node in Australia, and I think it's up now. These numbers are kind of scary because you never want to see your site load that slow, but you can kind of see the difference with the CDN and not with the CDN. So again, the raccoons more help to carry your site. So if you see, it's a couple seconds that it improves it. Not a whole lot, but I think the closest one it was pulling from was somewhere in Asia, not China. Okay. Internet's a little crazy, so we're not going to do, the demo time will be screenshot time. So here's a GIF of going to Key CDN and sort of what you have to do to actually generate a zone and add a CDN to your site. Let's let this loop a couple times. It's pretty simple. This is just the normal features. There's a whole advanced features that have just a ton of stuff. Like you can force it to only use SSL for all of your content, which I normally turn on. But this is basically it, and it's like 15 seconds. You hit save. Once you enter the name, it'll take about 5 minutes for it to create your site, and then you will switch over to the next slide in a second. We'll let this loop through like once. So you do the zone name, you choose if you want to do a push or a pull. Almost all my content, I have one site that I'm using a push on, and that's just for a lot of videos that we have. That was easier just to offload these big sort of interviews and a couple other type of stuff. Okay. So you hit save, and you'll have a new area over here. It'll generate a name for you. It'll be usually whatever you type in whatever their current address is. If you want to get more creative, you can do stuff with DNS. So you could just have it, cdn.yoursite.com, and you have to make a DNS entry. It's a little bit more advanced for us. Georgia Tech does not like to forward out our DNS to external entities. because then it's without getting through a whole process to approve it. So I just let it have its own site, and almost all the time, no one will ever notice that. So the next step is for the Drupal CDN module, once you enable it, you'll have these different ones. You'll have disable, testing mode, and if you want to display stats or not. It's pretty straightforward. It has some stuff that's really smart, like if you use different libraries, like from like jQuery or Google or Amazon, there's no point of them crawling your site, grabbing content that's already on a CDN and putting it on your CDN. That's just like duplicate effort, because a lot of times some of these other ones are going to have a better CDN than you are, because that's their whole business model. So you just click on enable, you can turn on the stats or not. That's, again, all of this is a per role configuration. You'll type in the address of your CDN. There's that far future expiration tag. You can leave that on or off. If you're using SSL, you'll turn that on. You can have different file URLs you're blocking. So in this example, I'm blocking all kind of Word documents and Excels and PDFs. You can also whitelist stuff if you want that to go. You can have different Drupal paths that you can block if you want. So it gives you a lot of flexibility on what you want to do. So if you are thinking, okay, I want my front page and the user page to be on the CDN, but I don't want like a private internal page, then you can just go through and blacklist that out. So here's the stats that load on the bottom of each page, and what you can do from here is you can see the number of files that's serving up on there, how long it took to alter the URLs. So in this case, it was like 1.2 milliseconds. You can also, if you update a file and it's not showing up on there, you can do this touch, and what it'll do is it will tell the CDN to delete that file and resync it on there. So that's good if you're just doing like one file change instead of clearing your entire cache, or then going over to the CDN and telling it to purge its cache to re-grab your whole site, and then you might have users in between that are just sitting there suffering from Australia or wherever. Okay, so why doesn't everyone use the CDN? The cost, that can go up real quick unless you're really paying attention and you have a reason for that, like you want to use one of the bigger CDNs or smaller ones. Sometimes it's unnecessary. If you have like a small site and you're only servicing, so let's say you're like a pet store in Atlanta, like you don't really care about Europeans looking at your site. I mean, maybe you do if you have like really cute animals, but so you don't get as much benefit. There's different security implications. So when I split my site into earlier, I don't actually use a CDN on there because it's all user-generated content, and some of that's more secure that we don't want to be floating on a CDN that's outside of GT space. It does definitely add additional complexities, so it's harder to troubleshoot different problems when they do come up, and really haven't had to do too much with that. Every once in a while, if someone's saying something's not showing up, I can go through and manually going down, touch that file, tell it to resync, but that usually fixes it. But if you're doing anything bigger, it is harder to troubleshoot just as you're adding more and more steps to different things. So that's it. I have some slides and notes up there that have a couple more links to the modules. There's my email address. I don't really use Twitter, so yeah. If anyone has any questions or suggestions or stuff they've done, yeah.
Have you ever had enough of a demand to like use a CDN with like Varnish or any of those kinds of technologies?
So I don't think you could, but so what my thing was, since I'm a team of one, and I would always try to send my ideas to our web hosting team. It's interesting. So we've got a couple other GT people here, but they host their own content. So if they're in a school or a college, a lot of times they have their own IT infrastructure in place. So they'll have their own hosting, and they'll be able to do a lot more stuff on their boxes. Since I'm a department and I fall under this kind of weird chain, I'm sort of at the mercy of web hosting. So a lot of it was back and forth. I forgot, I didn't put this in there, but I was able to get my memory increase on there and move to a different server. And a lot of the stuff was sort of like my tale from like 2013 to like now, of sort of these different kind of big steps you can do. But the big thing is stuff that you can do without being too technical. Because some of those ones, they talk about, like, all right, change memory cache and stuff like that. But if you don't have access to the box, and you're on like a shared hosting, like GoDaddy or Bluehost, you're very limited in what you can do. Sometimes you don't even have access to the php.ini. So a lot of stuff that's coming that I haven't tested yet is like PHP 7. I've heard that's really a lot more efficient with memory, so you can get away with some of these bigger modules and stuff. But really the biggest thing was just splitting my site in two. That really made such a huge difference of just having content creation on one and kind of leaving that alone, let that kind of big and grow. And then my other stuff was just all my other content. And so I didn't really touch on this, but like one of our big groups is all the international students. We have to have all of this like Homeland Security mandated like visa and immigration stuff on our site. So we just have pages and pages and pages of content of this immigration stuff that they have to read and have to go through and do this kind of stuff. So our site's already massive as it is, and we get a whole bunch of traffic from all these different people that look at our site or want to do a partner with us, or study abroad people, or international students, or parents of international students, or just the random people that find our site. So it's this sort of, our site's always on. So even stuff like the weekly maintenance, I'm always like dreading. I'm like, oh, it's going to be down for an hour. They're like, yeah, it's 5 a.m. But I'm like, yeah, but that's not 5 a.m. You know, over in all these other countries, that's like prime working time. So, you know,
considered doing your image processing for your content people on a separate server entirely?
Yes, but the problem is so my content creators are not very technical, and it's more of, you can show them stuff, like they're good, they're great, but thinking outside of the checklist is kind of like, that's a little much. And a lot of stuff they're doing is just minor edits for stuff. So if there's new immigration like thing, which is always changing depending on what's going on in Congress, it's like, okay, we gotta go update this now and change this, stuff like that. And it's all like minor stuff on there. So they're not doing too much big content creating, but yes, I mean, ideally that would be the goal, is to have a provisioning.
Yeah, like the MCP thing, you could probably send that work away if it's on a server that's not dependent upon the CDN module.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, and maybe that's worth revisiting.
They don't have to worry about uploading a 9 megabyte file, because that's on somebody
Yeah,
else.
yeah. I mean, a lot of it's just education, but then you also have like, oh, cool, this person's great, and then there's turnover, and then you're like, let's start over again. Yeah. Also, the thing is, I didn't go into too much detail about the IMCE. Like, there's tickets for both the IMCE people and for CDN people, and they're both kind of like, it's the other person's like problem. And then it's been like 2 years, so I just think they're like, we'll just wait for Drupal 8. It'll probably just use something different. So, yeah.
So the CDN module itself doesn't give you the purge feature, right? That you know when the content is needs to be updated, and you call something to.
No, you can clear the cache, and that would normally trigger it. But if it's something more urgent, you can go into your CDN, and there's a purge button on your zone, and you can tell it to purge that data, and then it will trigger a resync on there. So what the CDN module is just connects the two as like it makes a bridge for it to go through and crawl your site. So from there's no option to tell it to like go and do that. I believe you do that through clearing the cache, because every time you make a change on the CDN module, it says, go ahead and clear the cache, then tell it to like reforce and resync. But the CDN module is also great. So if you would only want to purge the entire cache if you did something really big, like change a theme around or updated lots and lots of CSS. That's now already like mimified and through Drupal's caching to then put it through on the CDN. I only had to do it a couple times for that. But yeah, does that make sense?
I was looking at the CDN module for key CDN. It seems like Drupal 8, for Drupal 8, there's a key CDN parger module that's doing.
Right. Yeah. So with Drupal 8, but I don't have any sites on Drupal 8 yet. If I do, I will update this talk and put it in there. The nice thing about Drupal 8 is they have new tags you can do, and you could tell those certain tags of those kinds of fields to update. So if you just have a certain like content type and you're like, okay, this one just got updated, why would you clear the entire cache, which is what we have to do now in 7? You can just tell it this one tag now for these needs to get cleared. So if you have something that gets changed, like whatever, quote of the day or something like that, then you can just say, all right, clear the quote of the day tag on there. So that's like, Drupal 8 caching is just like, probably you could get away with not having a CDN for some of your stuff, because it just takes away from that. But for me and sort of my whole story, it's just like, what was in my power to sort of change that doesn't cost a lot of money that we can do to sort of make myself survive on shared hosting? Cool. All right, we've got a couple minutes for the next keynote. Unless anyone has anything else. Anyone have any other struggles of shared hosting? No?
Couldn't go.
All right, cool. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you. Very good.
I want to see you want to fix this video?
I got a couple extra slots if you want to test it out. I offered that the last talk if you want to just. No, I try to keep it themed though. So this one was raccoons. I do every talk I do. I try to keep it themed with different little ones. So I like the banana cat is like the best. Yeah, well, so they'll expire it if you're not checking in, or they have to verify. Like I haven't used it yet. I'll probably use it in one of my next like side projects. But when they offer it for free, they want to make it more so like people aren't just abusing it. So you have to do a little bit of verify. Oh, it's 3 months? Okay, I thought it was even more.
You can set up cron jobs and scripts to automatically do.
Sounds like it's just a workaround to that.
Yeah, there's an auto set of numbers. Truly, people will just have that. I use it for both.
Yeah. Okay.
It's great.
Yeah, so if you're using it for like any sort of home automation thing, like having that SSL is going to be great rather than putting your traffic just over regular port 80. So like I say, the easiest thing to do is just put your site on SSL because it just makes everything, it's that peace of mind for your user, especially if you're doing anything where you're collecting information. Because a lot of times now, like Google will alert you like, hey, this is not secure that you're sending this data over, especially like login stuff. And a lot of the companies are getting smarter and they're actually doing stuff where it will be an insecure page to load it faster, but then some of the modules will push through like the AJAX for the login, or it'll take you to a different page for that. But I just like, why not just encrypt everything, and then you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, so I use them at first, but then they have limits, and I was going to hit that limit because I do about, between all of my sites, I do about 120 gigs worth of bandwidth because I got about 7 other kind of brochure sites for different programs. So the thing is, it's great. Like I set it up for one site, and it worked fine for that because I think you get like 500 megs or something like that. So I did that as a test just to see, it's like, okay, like let's see how this works, and it was fine. And I was like, okay, let's actually upgrade and like pay for something. And like, you know, like $50 is not too reasonable, but I didn't want to go and build my own box and put another hat on where now I'm like a administrator on top of being a web hosting on top of like all my other responsibilities. So, cool.
The CDN, do you have to, if you're using SSL, do you need certificates for each one?
No, so, well, it depends. You can do your custom one if you have, yes, you can have a CDN for each, you can have a cert for each, for your CDN, or you can use their shared one, or you can use like the free one for Let's Encrypt. So one of the options, let's see. Yeah, and here there's an advanced option, and you can choose which one you want to do when you make it. Can't really pause it, but under the advanced settings, you can use like a shared one. So a lot of times, like KeyCDN is the cert I'm using for them. So they have a wildcard cert. So if whatever the zone name you create will be covered under them, and you're just going to trust them that their stuff is valid, which I think as a hosting provider that'd be perfectly normal. Like they're not going to expire. But you can also use your own. But that's where you need to go into like the next level where you're managing now your DNS. So that's where it's like, what's the simplest route that's less complicated that you can get through there? But if you wanted to hide stuff from your user, you could just, you could have, cdn.yoursite, generate an SSL cert for that. Or when you first make your cert, you get what's called like a wildcard cert. So you get whatever your subdomain is, .yoursite.com, and then you can put anything in there. But those are usually more money because now you're putting more trust in, and you're asking for more for them to trust you that you're going to actually put your legit content on there. There's more room if you just have one line for your site, but now you have a star and it's anything with that. If your site gets hacked and someone sets up whatever Gmail clone, then they're going to come after you and break your it's all bad. So some of the other CDNs won't now they're all sort of going to this, but before they would charge you money to do it, like to use one of their hosting, like one of their certs or have something else. But now with the Let's Encrypt, as long as you sort of set reminders or set up like the cron to do it, you could probably get away with having that for all your stuff. And it's not too much work to do. Because a lot of times it's just very easy, simple, generate your certificate, copy that, put that in there, fill out your information. That all has to be like legally find you, like your real address and stuff like that for your business or whatever. That gets through, they approve it, you download your cert, put that into your Apache or your web client, your backend client, gets turned on, turn on those 2 files for Drupal, the Htaccess and the settings, and you're pretty much good to go in like 15 minutes.
Good, thanks.
Yeah.
So in RE, the individual people are creating the forms. Are they creating
Yes.
the forms? So
Yeah.
like Lori's creating the forms for.
She has someone else do it, but yes. So a lot of times, if I train them once and they go and they create their own stuff. So that's a lot easier than me having 200 requests every month of them just like, all right, we need to add this and do that. So I empower them a lot. But I also have the permission set up so they can't do each other's ones. They can do each work group's one, but you're gonna have to make these little boxes so they don't go too crazy. And like, you know, like deleting content, like that's like always unchecked. So they'll just send me something like delete this from the site and do different stuff.
And then just out of curiosity, how can we encourage that? So like we upload or we have people upload all of this content.
What I do now is I unpublish it and I let it sit there, and then I set myself a calendar reminder to send an email out and say, hey, look at all this unpublished content. If you need it, let me know. Because a lot of times they'll just update from fall 2015 trip to 2016 and just change the name. So they will use a lot of content.
But I mean all the stuff that.
Oh, you mean like files and stuff like that? Yeah, that's an ongoing project. And the problem is I'll find someone and then I'm like, cool, put this on your schedule to do, because no one wants to do content cleanup, like ever. So I have to go usually from the top down and talk to all the directors and stuff like that. We do it like, usually we'll do some sort of like set, like one whole day of like, all right, let's just go, everyone go and clean up stuff on the web. And no, but they will start yelling at you if you have a bunch of different backups on there.
I'm just thinking to the amount, so there's
So I think my site's about 5 gigs right now.
on the back end when someone like with these, they basically say.
Oh yeah, so when I split it over, like that was the first content cleanup. So I got rid of all these PDFs of like people's resumes and stuff. I'm like, we don't need this on here, like that. So yes, so what we'll do is a lot of our applications they'll go through, and when they download the results, they'll go ahead and clear it, and that will purge the files as well. But I thought you were talking about more like content. They're like old events and stuff like that. If I'm keeping it that tidy. Yes, but almost all that stuff gets submitted through iStart. So it's only some stuff like housing before they're a student and before they have an iStart record. So it's like this weird small little gap where they don't have their GT credentials or anything else. We'll do that, but it's just sort of, it's a weird little gray area, and then you know, putting on SSL, fix that, and then also having it on a different site. Those are the big things.
I gotta do that for admissions. We have old transcripts. Now they are. Our original web developers made it public files.
Yeah. Oh, that's the other thing. I guess I should have talked about that too. But just like using private files for all your stuff, and you can do it in shared hosting, kind of where you can make it live outside of your HTTP docs folder to store your files. Yes, because Drupal's smart enough you do private because it does token based for that. So that way people can't share links because the token is only for them to do that. But there's also good and bad for that. So then you need to make another container for your public files too. So if you have different PDFs, because that was the other issue I ran into where I was like, yeah, private everything. And then people would try to share links and they're like, the students were like, this doesn't work. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we got to make a new container for public PDF files. They go in one, and any private stuff goes in another, like that.
Well, we set the file field.
Yeah.
Depending on the field, we'll set that field private.
Right. I mean, that's basically what I'm talking about for different ones. But you know, because we have all these different like brochures for all the different like programs for the students and stuff like that.
Did you have a camping in those ones? Some days their file system is outside the normal Drupal file system.
Yes.
The way
Yes. Yes. But sort of the main thing we have is ours was not built from the ground up to be Drupal. It was research sites and everything else. And like they're converting and slowly we're getting there. But the growing pains of people like me that have like the biggest stuff on there is just where we run into these difficulties. So.
Thank you.
All right, cool. So you're saying you applied to GT recently?
Yes, web developer for, there's a particular school that's got like 12 sites. The girl that was managing it is being promoted or moved to some.
Oh, okay, yes, I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I'm hopeful, but we just have to see, because I've not heard back yet. It's been about a week. Apparently things turn very slowly over
Yes,
there, so.
yeah.
And I appreciate your working within that system. I mean, I was within Southwire Company, and all they would do is give me, you know, like, here, have your own virtual machine. And it's like, well, that's good. I get root access then. Yay.
Well, the thing is, also, like I didn't want to do, which always seems like it's an option, is okay. Well, I can go
Slow,
do my own stuff, but then I have to put a new hat on. Where now I become an administrator too, and now I'm responsible for Apache patching, all of this other stuff, and so. I'm the main IT person for my unit, so I do anything from keyboard is not working to website. So, but it's fine because I only have about 30 users, so it's very manageable. But then when you add some other stuff, it's like, okay, now you have, it's always juggling and stuff like that.
You know, when that spike comes, it all happens at once.
Yeah.
I understand. So, yeah, I'd like to reach out, and if we get in, I'll get you on LinkedIn and keep you up to date.
Yeah, we have monthly Drupal meetings when I'm one of the people, one of the chairs, and I share it with another guy, and then this other guy, Eric Simbrecht, that's walking around here.
Yeah.
He's also on the committee too, and we do try to do pretty good monthly. We have a good mailing list where we talk about different problems and stuff like that. We have little help desk hours where you can just come and bring your problems all over campus, and we'll just try to work through it with different people and match you up. If you're trying to do something like with the rules or something else, we'll find people that work in there. So it's a good, close-knit community, and it seems to work really well.
Okay. I mean, I only live about 10 minutes away from this. Actually, 20 minutes up a Vine Road.
Oh, nice. Yeah, cool. I live over at Cumberland Mall, so it's a nice commute in.
I live in Smyrna.
Oh, nice. All right, let's go seeing you.
Sorry, I missed your presentation, but there was another one.
Yeah, that's always the thing, but that's why they record them, so you can just check it out online later.
So, do you, basic question is, we use VPS hosting for everything, not shared, and but I do see the attraction of shared hosting because, you don't have to manage anything.
Yeah.
Have you found it fast enough? Obviously, that's what you're presenting, right?
Yeah, it's just, so my solutions were basically in a nutshell, it's SSL helps for a lot of stuff because that's also what my target audience is because I have people all over the world accessing my site and filling stuff out. Because we're sort of the portal for getting new GT students, especially international students, and also sending people abroad for different stuff. So going,
do you have a card?
I don't think I have one because I'm just on there. But I can.
You can send me.
Yeah, sounds good.
Your
So
presentation.
yeah, I'll make sure it's up on the site after I finish because I was still editing it, up
But
to the
I
last
don't have your site, so.
So no, I'm talking about on the DrupalCamp site
Okay.
under the session. So I use that, and I use a CDN to offload a lot of stuff, and that fixes a lot of problems. So the big thing is also reducing modules that you don't need, and if you can find another way to do it too. So what we had was I had one giant site that had 4 kind of different work groups on there, and we also had all this user-generated content that was getting created all the time. And so I split the site in 2, and I made a read-only kind of site, which just holds all of our main content, and I had another one that we use for user-generated content. So that made it easier to manage, and I had them both on 2 different servers. So you're kind of, if you're looking at it from an outside perspective, you're now having 2 shared hosting ones. But for us, it was because the constraints we had for our web hosting was not enough that we could just host it all in the same server or all in the same one because of the way it would split up the
But
memory.
why would you subject yourself to the constraints of shared hosting when you?
Because I'm a team of 1.
Yes, you can. I mean, I am assuming that you, from the sounds of it, I am assuming that you do know how to manage a
Yes,
VPS.
yes, but it's also there's a lot of there's lots of different small constraints. So like colleges at GT, they do their own hosting because they have a team of they have their own machines in their buildings that they host their content on. But since I'm under a department and we're smaller, but we also have the biggest site on there, I'm working with the shared hosting because it's free right now, so that's already subsidized. So I'd have to.
What do you mean it's free?
Well, that's part of our the campus is paying for hosting for that. I'm not using GoDaddy. It's all internally hosted on there. So what other colleges do, they have their own machines and they have their own staff for doing that. So since I'm a team of 1 and I have many different hats, I didn't want to also be a server admin on top of that, which is fine to do. But then if different patches and reading up on that and making sure everything is secure, and then this is more of another failure point for me where I can leave it on the shared hosting where there's a team of whatever, how many people, and they're doing it that way.
You're an employee at GT, not a student.
Yes, I'm an employee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
does GT have a lot of Drupal sites?
Yes, I think we're about 65% Drupal, and then I think about 30 WordPress, and then the rest are just other sort of research sites and stuff like that. Right.
Can I grab a still image of you?
Sure.
For the website?
Mm-hmm.
Don't have any problem with this going through Facebook working.
Man, I already read that article, but we're already on there. So was that 1 in 2 Americans? Yeah.
Standard procedure now.
Yeah. So you have other questions or interested in? Okay. Yeah.
Trying to understand the setup.
Yeah. Well, it turned into just sort of different constraints.
Just give your mic chart.
Yeah, that's great.